All right, guys. So we need to go over some stuff about recognizing and responding to the anxiety disorder behind hoarding. Okay. So occasionally we're going to run into a job that's pretty bad, and you need to understand what it is so that you can work with it with sensitivity. Okay. These are people. They're people first. Okay. They ended up in this situation from things that you probably couldn't even understand or imagine. All right. So this is definitely wrapped up in trauma. Okay. So hoarding is a disorder. It's a mental disorder that is classified as anxiety. All right. It involves persistent difficulty discarding or parting with possessions regardless of their value. Right. So, there's a potential that it's, a piece of dog hair, you pick it up, throw it away. And that was part of a dog that passed, and that memory is bound to that piece of hair. Right. So, obviously that's an extreme example, but it's just an example, right? So, you really need to treat their items with respect before disposing of it, regardless of the value of it, right? So a lot of time what we'll like to do is try and set up a staging area. We'll bring anything of obvious value out there and put it on one side, things that are questionable in the middle, and things that we just truly believe is garbage, no matter who you are, goes next to the dumpster, right? So that we can put the bags in with the customer and they can see exactly what we're throwing away. That's really important. Anyways, back to the disorder. So the whole thing, this anxiety disorder, regardless of the value of the items, leads to excessive accumulation, right? Causing living space to become cluttered and unsafe, okay? So when speaking with the customer, it's important to put it into terms that are not insulting. Okay, you got to think of it from their position. Put your heart in their position. It's a collection. It's not a hoard. Okay, that's not with a laugh. It's a collection. It's a big collection, and it might be a collection of what we consider junk, but it's a collection. Okay, they are a collector, not a hoarder. All right, it is. There's a social stigma to being called a hoarder, and a collector can mean a lot of things, and so that's something to be sensitive of, right? We don't want to make them feel bad when we're there. It's clutter, not trash or junk, right? Oh my gosh, you got a clutter problem, don't you? So to them, this stuff is priceless. I know it might not make sense to you, but it makes sense to licensed therapists. Okay. The root cause is often an emotional attachment or a fear of loss or perceived future usefulness of an item, right? So you have a couple different types of hoards. You might have a junkyard and it's full of, cars that are never ever going to start again, right? That's a hoard of cars, okay? They might have an attachable, an attachment to somebody, right? Maybe it is a book that a loved one used to read all the time, but it is just torn up, the dog chewed on it, it looks like garbage, right? There's an emotional attachment to that, right? And so the loss of those to them useful items, can be, pretty traumatic in itself, right? And so it's something we need to be sensitive of, right? So it's not laziness or lack of cleanliness. This isn't what's going on. It's a very complex mental health issue, okay? So how does hoarding impact daily life, right? So this is an important thing. This is why we're going in there. There's blocked hallways and exits. Access to kitchens or bathrooms can be very limited. Increased risk for fire hazards, falls, pest infestations. Strained relationships with their family and friends and neighbors, okay? So here's some pro tips here, right? Hoarding can severely affect a person's quality of life and health. And there's a lot of shame and embarrassment, and it'll often cause isolation. So the fact that you're even being allowed into their home is a pretty big deal, right? So you need to be really, really careful to deal with the situation with sensitivity for the customer, okay? Why is it linked to anxiety? A lot of people wonder that, like, I'm anxious, I'm fidgety, so I start throwing. Doesn't make sense to people. It's not something that is rational, okay? So many individuals, begin hoarding experience with overwhelming distress when they're faced with discarding items because The act of letting go triggers intense anxiety, right? Similar to a panic attack for some people. So instead, they take that and they use it to stimulate the other side, and create endorphins, which is going out and shopping. Okay, so there's a recursion that occurs there. Okay, so the anxiety may be rooted in past trauma, loss, deprivation. These are important things, because when you go in there, you probably don't want to talk about a divorce because maybe they lost a husband. Maybe you don't want to talk about loss because that's a certain thing, right? You don't necessarily need to focus on how wonderful your kids are because maybe they lost their kids. Okay, so it's really important to let the customer introduce these pieces of information to you before you make assumptions. Okay. And anyway, so their decision making is often impaired, making it even harder to sort or discard items. So, because of this overwhelming anxiety, we could put down a table of everything in front of them, and they'll look at each item, and it'll take 15 minutes for each little thing, and we don't have the time to do that, right? And so, a lot of the time, the stuff does end up going to a storage unit. It's not our stuff. We can't control that, but we need to, put out a fire per se, because either a family member is really concerned, or the county steps in, or the city steps in, a relative, whatever it may be. It's a hard thing for them to do. So we want to try and do it like ripping off a Band-Aid, make it really happen fast, keep that momentum up, get it cleared out. And, quite often they fill it back up. Okay. So, it's like, in any other mental health issue, until it's dealt with, it's going to keep happening. So it can be difficult when you went in there and you worked really, really hard and you made it look really, really good, and you go back again, in a month, and it is destroyed and worse than it was the first time, right? So, it's important to realize that that is no reflection of your work, okay? And it's no reflection of their cleanliness either, okay? So, you don't go out of there saying, oh man, they're a pig. No, it's just like, I have empathy. I feel like, my gosh, they haven't fixed this for themselves yet. So anyways, just always try and speak respectfully to them. Avoid judgmental language, right? We're not there to judge, okay? Focus conversations on safety rather than cleanliness or appearance, okay? Like, oh my gosh, this place is awful. No, oh my gosh, no, right? Oh my gosh, yeah, this could use some cleaning. This could use some tidying up. I wouldn't even say this could use anything, right? You just let them kind of guide the conversation. So, but if you are, make it focused on safety, right? Cleanliness is subjective, okay? Appearance is subjective, right? The person going through it is what's deciding that, not you. Safety is universal, all right? So anyway, some pro tips here: avoid forcing immediate removal of items, right? It can cause emotional harm. So that's why we stage things, so that they can go through and parse them out themselves. That'll help us get rid of a seriously huge chunk of their hoard, and that's ultimately our goal, right? Let's get it livable, which means get everything usually staged into the garage, so it can be sorted out over time, because we don't have the time to stay and help do that, right? We can refer them off to organizers who can help with that, but the organizers won't come in until it's dealt with, and not a hoard. Okay, all that garbage has to be gone before they can organize. So that's usually where we step in. So we're going to be offering resources for, professional mental health and specialized cleanup support for this, the organization of the stuff that was staged. Something neat. A lot of people don't know that show Hoarders, that's on, I think it's on A&E or the Learning Channel. Dr. Robin Zazio, she's actually lives here in Sacramento area. So that's kind of neat. We have resources that, a lot of other people in the whole entire world don't have access to, right? People who have been trained by Dr. Robin Zazio. So, we might offer some, professional mental health there, but that's a really tricky situation too, right? It's like, here, you need therapy. Obviously they need therapy, but how do you approach that, right? So a lot of the time I'll talk to their caregiver or, the family or whoever ordered the service and give them the resources so that they can deal with the situation. So your role as a service provider, right? Don't diagnose them, only recognize signs and adjust your work accordingly, okay? Ensure your own safety before entering a hoarding environment, right? If you can't get out of there in the event of a fire, you can't go in. It's a different kind of job, okay? So document hazards discreetly, and report them through proper channels, okay? So if you look in a room and, there's a bunch of boxes and there's a big heavy, dresser sitting on top of all that stuff, you can't do it, right? It's not safe to bring that thing down. So you need to report those things, but anything that we're doing in there needs to be dealt with this discretion, right? Just like the name of this whole thing is Katie's Clean Slate, right? You won't hear it advertised, okay? So report and remember, compassion is the key when you're working in these situations, okay? So anyways, you want to, here's some things on recognizing, responding to, and safely handling hoarding and biohazard situations, okay? So, there's some best practices here, right? And so, some of these hoarding homes can have a real excessive accumulation of items. Some of it might be biohazards or hazards in general, blocked exits, unstable piles, pest infestations, things we were just talking about, right? But again, you want to approach this with compassion, without judgment, right? Making components, more difficult, right? This is a process, so every cog in that wheel is important. So to recognize biohazards, right? A lot of the time you're just going to smell it, but biohazards include blood, bodily fluids, animal waste, mold, other potentially infectious materials, right? So I'm going to do another training on bloodborne pathogens because that's a really important one. When you see these things, don't just clean it yourself, okay? You need to let us know that's a hazard, okay? And we can send somebody out that's trained specifically to deal with biohazards, because not just in getting that stuff out, but also disposal of that waste takes special considerations, okay? So anyways, they could pose serious health risks, including disease, respiratory problems, so this isn't an environment anyone wants to stay in for long term. So if you see signs of biohazards, you see some mold up there, make sure and let us know and stop working on that. All right, I don't want anybody to get lifelong, issues. The interesting thing with mold, though, is that it's a really big deal if you're there all the time. If you have limited exposure, it's not as big of a deal. But the way they treat it is using this stuff called sodium hydrochloride, which is basically bleach water, okay? and it kills the mold, so they spray it down in there. Anyways, so if you see those things, it requires special remediation. So don't attempt to clean it, yourself, because it does require special PPE training, things like that. So there's some safety precautions. So you always want to wear your PPE, gloves, masks, goggles, protective clothing. We have those Tyvek suits, right? If you feel more comfortable wearing one, you're more than welcome. We have them at Ops, okay? But just make sure it's appropriate for the environment, okay? So you want to definitely be wearing the gloves, the mask, right? Because there's going to be stuff in the air. Goggles, there's going to be potential eye damage, right? So definitely wear those. And probably some protective clothing. Maybe this is one of those situations you want to wear long sleeves, okay? So be alert for sharp objects and hidden in the clutter, right? So if you're having to walk through a pile, make sure they don't have, one of those things that you put paper receipts on. That's like basically a big nail sticking out of a pole. Just be mindful when you're walking through there. There could be anything underneath that, pile of stuff you're standing on. Some tips would be try and use disposable tools, because sanitation work in these scenarios, you can't reuse those, right? So this is where we're going to use the disposable mop heads. We're going to use everything that gets used there, we throw away. Microfiber, towels, whatever it may be. So, actually often in those sort of scenarios, I'll use the terry cloth ones because they are cheap and we're throwing them all away. Okay. And cross contamination until we get to that last point is probably an afterthought. Okay. So, anyways, when to stop working, right? Stop immediately if you encounter any sort of structural integrity or instability, excessive mold, dangerous pests, right? If there's rats, biting at your feet, then yeah, absolutely stop working. Some things that we're going to end up doing in that situation is we're call a specialized remediation team for hazardous cleanup in that sort of situation, because sometimes you might see the weight of a hoard might break through the floor. We can't fix that. That's not a cleaning job. Okay. So be sure to report all hazards, whether they be structural, or emotional from the customer, or you're finding piles of needles, whatever it is. Be sure to report those things to your manager, because it's really important that we deal with those properly. So on customer interaction here, so we want to speak respectfully and focus on safety rather than cleanliness. Is something we already talked about. Don't photograph, right, or share details of the hoard with other people, because if it gets back around, that is really, really bad. So you want to maintain confidentiality at all times, right? If it comes back around, your friend was talking to their kid's friend that their house has a giant hoard, you could do real damage to that kid. So don't do that, please. Otherwise, just recognize that you're not looking at a pigsty. You're not looking at a wreck. I mean, yeah, it's a pigsty. Yeah, it's a wreck. No, it's really just trauma. I look at that and my heart breaks. Okay, because I know they're going through some real tough fucking shit. Right? That is not something that people should have to go through. They shouldn't have to live that way. Okay, so let's help them get this problem solved. All right. Thank you guys, and I know hoarding jobs are really difficult, and I appreciate you. Okay.